thing
grows where you are, it exists where you are.
An intentional journey to open up the pathways
To connect us to something bigger. It helps everybody in the equation.
has been the magic of the people, and it's passed from person to person.
You have to follow through. You have to do the thing. Like happy, safe place.
Is that your logic, or was that something you were told?
Focus on your craft and your practice. Just ask me why. Why in general?
Can you unteach yourself something that society has taught you?
Mystical experiences will always be different.
Your body is your temple.
You've probably been doing certain things your whole life.
You need nothing else other than what you're in right now.
This is Georgina. This is Nike.
And this is Temperance.
And welcome to Occultism with a Side of Salt.
Hello, this is Georgina.
This is Nike.
This is Temperance.
And welcome to Occultism with a Side of Salt. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about hexing and hex ethics. I think this is an ongoing conversation that's been going on really since the mainstream, really since all of magic, because you even see discourses about this in things like the records of the Golden Dawn members and going way, way back. It's a conversation that makes sense to have continuously because hexing is going to be controversial, right? When you decide to do harm to another human being, that is something that people are going to have different thoughts on, right? Some people are very pro-hex, some people are very against it. And we're going to be exploring sort of all of the arguments, all of the issues, all of the reasoning. I think that it's a nuanced topic. I think too often online, especially because this is resurfacing, particularly on TikTok, people go hexing good or hexing bad and don't have any gray area, right? They're either like all hexing is good or all hexing is bad, karma's going to get you, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground discussion. So in this episode, we're going to be talking all about the ethics of hexing. I think we should mention a little bit like how hexing has different levels of severity. Things like abuse, things like hexing people in your immediate family, solitary ethics versus group ethics, things like karma, and of course the Wiccan raid has to come into this conversation as it's a classic talking point. Is it okay to hex people? Our personal opinions. Is it possible to do hexes on politicians, celebrities, etc.? Because as we know, there was a mass hexing against people like Donald Trump and Brett Kavanaugh. As well, there have been hexings against various celebrities and general public figures. The rise of internet hex wars, which actually have a little bit of a history. Hex warring is not a new thing. And everything hex related. So before we get into it, I think we should define what ethics are because that is in the title of the episode. So ethics are basically moral principles, you deciding what's right and wrong, and the ethics vary based on your school of philosophy, your culture, and your personal self. So ethics as a term is typically applied to schools of philosophy. The two big ones that come are like moral relativism and moral objectivism, which are like, is morality relative or is it objective and all that type of stuff. Basically, ethics is where you stand. Where do you fit? And I want to say, since this is such a contentious episode, the three of us actually don't completely agree on this topic, and we don't expect you to agree with all of us because this is a very personal discussion, but I think it's a worthy one to have because it does impact everyone around you, right? You don't hex yourself, and if you're hexing yourself, hex your way into a therapist office. Anyways, let's break into it.
I'd like to even further define ethics just so we're clear that there are separate ethics. There's universally accepted ethics. Like as a country, as a society, we agree certain things are okay and not okay. But every individual gets to also make their own set of ethics, like / morality, so we all get to define what we find ethical, not ethical, inside that wider umbrella of universally accepted ethics. So, universally, it's not okay to, let's say, hit someone
with a wrench.
With your car.
I was going to say with your car, but Georgina started shaking her head, and I was like, oh no.
The wrench! No, the street wrench.
Don't hit someone with a street wrench. That is moral ethics.
Like you, societally, universally, that would be a not acceptable thing, but you as a person get to determine whether you think drinking soda every night that you record OWASP is acceptable.
I've decided it's acceptable and you're bullying me. During Pride Month, this is homophobia.
Well, yeah, so ethics are going to vary, and I think individually, this is something that every occultist when they start practicing should think about, right? I think you should have your own set of ethics when you practice, right? I don't think you should necessarily agree with what you're told, which we're going to get into. But as an individual, I think everyone should set out rules for themselves and discover what they think is ethical so they can have those boundaries for themselves. Whether you think hexing is wrong on a personal level is very different than if you think nobody else should hex. I think those are very different things. I have no judgment for people. No.
We see this argument come up in America with abortion. Is the universal argument of, okay, I hold a religious belief that aborting is murder, so I'm going to make sure that you can't have access to this thing. Well, that's your personal ethic, that's your morality, that's your stance based off of a larger body that holds that same opinion, right? So even in occultism, even within witchcraft, we have governing bodies that people may or may not adhere to. These governing bodies would be, Wicca would be a governing body that has set ethics that go with it. I'm sure Thelema has set ethics that go with it. There's
if you're like an OTO or AA member specifically, there are very specific rules that they kind of give you. Whereas if you're a solitary Thelemite, those don't apply to you, right? Like the AA has a lot of rules about teaching people, whereas solitary people do not have to follow those rules.
Well, and that's even true without it being like a super formalized structure like the OTO. I've spoken before about the loose coven that is where I live, and the only one that I've gone to. And this particular group, they will not allow you to attend in the future if they find out that you have done any form of baneful working. So it's not necessarily the group's ethics, as in like everyone in the group agrees, but it is the ethics handed down by the hierarchy as rules for being in the coven, like to come to circle. If you
but what
are
do they
a person
define
that's
as baneful? Because baneful doesn't just mean hexing.
I have no idea. I don't know. I have just kept quiet any of the few times that I've attended, because I haven't gone very much. But any of the few times that I've attended, we don't talk about it, so it doesn't need to come up. And if it were to come up, I would just stay quiet because, And
Yeah.
I know for a fact that some of the other members also like do baneful. Like I've done one or two. I know other people who have done a little bit more. Like some of the members of the group are not afraid of baneful workings. They just don't mention it to the I don't even know if I would call them the high priest and priestess. They just run the circle.
Yeah, well, because if it's not like a formalized coven, they could use different titles or whatever. But basically, baneful as a term, I think a lot of people say baneful magic to refer to hexing. But baneful just means like negative or bad. It doesn't really mean hexing specifically. I think the term baneful is not the most useful term because it's really vague. What one person considers baneful, someone else may not. Like I've seen a lot of debates on whether things like freezer spells or cord cutting would be considered baneful because they are like a
and
negative.
binding are both baneful. They are. Banishing is baneful and binding is baneful. So if you are doing things that fall into that sphere, you might not consider yourself harming someone or hexing someone, but they do fall into the sphere of baneful. And
There's also whether or not
banishing-
somebody considers anything that takes over your free will, which would include like love magic. And honestly, I would argue most magic is going to take over free will in some way, shape, or form, because you're influencing events, which ultimately are going to come down to like things that people would need to do. So, I mean, you could make the argument based off that all magic is baneful, which is I know what the church basically used for a long time. Just any magic's bad because bad.
Yeah, well, that's like a very sentiment that I see some mystics and some like really traditionalist high magicians, which actually, if you've read some of the old grimoires, they did not follow this principle, but they argue that anything that's not getting closer to spirits or not for ideas like, ascending the tree of life or whatever are not okay because you're not using magic to refine yourself, but using it to influence other acts around you, which I just want to point out, the actual grimoire writers, there's some weird stuff in there. If you've read Crossed Keys in particular, which is a combination of a couple old grimoires that were translated together, there's one to make any woman dance naked for you until she passes out, which I will just say, in a book about Christian mysticism, not exactly about transcendence, if you ask me. So even some people say
Leave
like
room for
all
Jesus. They're leaving room for Jesus. They didn't say that you were going to touch her when she's dancing. There's room for
no,
Jesus.
you're just doing like stripper magic. But yeah, like I think in general, like your personal ethics are going to vary. Even within traditions, you see variance. Like Wicca, I think it's brought up a lot in this conversation because Wiccans, especially solitary internet Wiccans, are very vocal about this and have been for a very long time. Even within Wicca, there's not like, not all Wiccans agree on this stuff. I know Thor Mooney explored this where things like the raid, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, um, are not like the very early, it came up after Gardner, right? Like it wasn't right when Gardner started everything. So even not all Wiccans agree with that. As well, like different forms of Wicca adhere to different levels of what the original Wiccans said. So, like one Wiccan tradition, because there's sub traditions within Wicca. There's Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Eclectic, Dianic, a bunch more. Like even within traditions of Wicca, they don't universally agree on this stuff. You see back and forth. So even within traditions, the tradition set morality will vary. I don't think you can necessarily assume broad stroke for any specific group unless you're talking to like a literal specific group.
Well, there's also other ideas like to speak on Wicca, but more broadly. I mean, there's other ideas that sort of have become, in a way, like a group thing without it being attached to any particular group, especially in like the New Age and people talking about karma. I see like karma and the threefold law kind of being used in the same way. And as a lot of people, like when you bring up hexing at all or anything that could be considered vaguely baneful, love magic, any of that kind of stuff, I haven't had it happen to me because I don't talk about it a lot, but I know every video I've seen of either like friends talking about baneful workings, like sometimes talking about abusers and things like that. There's always that one person that's like, you should just let karma get them, or you shouldn't do that because karma will come back to you, or the threefold law, it'll come back to you threefold. What you're doing to this person, it's better to go in love and light. And I would just like to say for the record, the way that karma is used in the West, especially in like pop culture and the common consciousness, that is not what karma originally was. So even that definition is wrong.
Well, that stance, that verbal internet stance that we see so much, has a lot of assumptions packed into it. One, you're assuming that I believe in karma, which I don't have to. As a witch, that is not something I have to believe in. Two, you're assuming that I follow any kind of doctrine that was written about by Wiccan writers, i.e., the threefold law or the Wicked Read or anything else. As a non-Wiccan, I'm not required to. So that's when group ethics don't really meet personal or solitary ethics. I think especially in the karma debate, karma gets taken out of its culture so much, it gets taken out of its context and it just gets thrown around. And I personally, me as a practitioner, I don't believe in karma. It's not part of my sphere of religious belief, spiritual belief, witchcraft belief. It does not exist to me. It's not part of any tradition that I follow. So that's not a universal truth. It's a personal truth, and it's a universal truth to certain religions, but I don't find myself within a culture or religion that acknowledges it. So to me, it's not a universal truth.
Well, it's also part of the conversation about cultural appropriation of the New Age and of like how common it is to appropriate from specifically Indian and Hindu culture. But even that, like the love and light stuff, that's not how it's supposed to be, and it's weird to me to take a bastardized version of an Eastern tradition and then trying to apply it to everyone in the world while also simultaneously rallying against evangelicalism and Christian people trying to make everybody Christian and trying to destroy all the other cultures around the world. It's weird to simultaneously be like, I'm anti-colonialism, and then also say karma's gonna get you if you do baneful workings. It's very weird to have that cognitive dissonance that you don't realize that you're just doing that in a new way.
Yeah, I think it's very. I get your point. Like, if you're against people saying, oh, you cannot apply universal spiritual truth from one religion to me, then do the same thing to other people who don't follow that religion. That is hypocritical. Yeah, that's not cool. Also, like, you can personally think these things and not throw it on everyone else, right? Like, especially I see it and I find it really irritating. Because I think if you're watching a video about someone hexing someone for petty reasons, right? Like, let's say they were rude to them at the nail salon versus I hex someone who abused me for multiple years and the court system never helped me, right? I think those are very different conversations and very different instances. When I see someone commenting on that, the girl pettily, annoyed me with, hey, maybe you're going too far, and saying karma or whatever, I find that a lot less offensive. It's annoying, sure, but it's very, I think, kind of cruel when you comment that on someone who is talking about, say, abuse, because a lot of people in the occult community do hex for like abuse reasons, and I think to comment that on someone who is an abuse victim, I think that's really messed up as well, because you're implying that them doing a karmic sort of act towards someone who has wronged them will cause them further harm. I think is really messed up, because I'm wondering how you then think karma works. How does karma work? Because it has to work through material action and things happening in the world. So in a way, couldn't that person be acting in the force of karma? But that gets into the whole, like, I don't believe in karma, I am karma thing, which I think is a little cringy. And can make you like a police like thinking of yourself as like a spiritual cop can be a little toxic. But I think there's a difference between hexing someone who really did something messed up and hexing someone for very petty reasons. And I think we should recognize that those aren't the same thing. Also, with hex ethics, we have to recognize not all hexes are the same strength, right? Like a jinx, a hex, a curse,
Wait.
a generation.
Before we get into that, I want to touch on something that goes with what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it won't make sense in the context.
Yeah.
But to take when we hear the stance of that you shouldn't hex people that have abused you or whatever, we really take the historical context of witchcraft out of the conversation, right? Because historically we know folk witchcraft especially has been used for baneful purposes since recorded witchcraft. So if since recorded witchcraft, witches have been doing baneful working against abusers, against what we would consider in modern times the patriarchy, against the government, against people that hold you down or hold you back or step over you. Okay, if we know that that is a historical context to folk witchcraft, and we're saying actually threefold thought, we're in one invalidating historical folk witchcraft, we're invalidating magic of the people.
Yeah, well, it's also, I think that witch karma thing in witchcraft is one of those things where ceremonial magic history of Wicca, which Wicca does come from Gardner being an OTO member, and Hermeticism mixes into witchcraft, because we got to remember Wicca comes from that high magic lineage historically. So I think there are a lot of kind of anti-hex sentiments in some of these high magic writers. So I think that's a situation where the high magic influence on Wicca really bled into it. That doesn't align with things like hoodoo or whatever that have much more looser things with this, because they're about fighting a system. I think that's an instance where that's bleeding into it, and I think that's my theory on how it kind of entered Wicca and then into all of witchcraft, because modern witchcraft,
well, I think it comes from a place of privilege, right? Where it's people who don't have to worry about using it or have other means to get power back to somebody. People who have, the money to hire a good lawyer for legal recourse. Somebody who has the money not to worry about if somebody stole from them and it could ruin their lives. Well, it sucks, but they don't necessarily need to like find a way to either get it back or get back at that person or whatever. It comes from a place of, I don't have to worry about it. It's either not really that big of a deal, or I can take other recourse against them and find my justice in other ways. Usually, I personally recommend magic as being sort of a last resort in those situations. If you can get legal recourse against somebody, if you can get stuff back, to get justice in some way in whatever situation without having to resort to magic or having to use magic to do like the majority of the legwork, could just be a boost. Usually I try to go for that because it's usually not meant in those situations to be the main part. And if you don't have any other recourse, then go for it. But, if you come from a place of privilege of not having to worry about it, then it's really easy to sit on your high horse and say, well, you shouldn't do it because it's bad. And, it's just, it's like, it's like with money magic, people being like, it's selfish and too earthly and not spiritual of you to do money magic. And it's somebody who is upper middle class saying that to somebody who is making minimum wage.
Well, it's also something really interesting. This is a little historic detail that I actually didn't find out until relatively recently. So Alex Saunders, the guy who sort of started off the Alexandrian Wiccan tradition, very strongly was anti-hex, but he would hire someone to hex for him. So he never had to do it, so it wouldn't impact him, but he paid someone to hex people for him pretty regularly, which I always found a little interesting.
Interesting. It's I wonder, because obviously I don't know much about the guy. I don't know what his reasonings were for him not doing it. It's very reminiscent again of privilege, of like, well, I don't want to get my hands dirty, but I like, you pissed me off, but I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't want to get myself into trouble by beating you up myself, but I can hire somebody to come get you. Not having to get your own hands dirty. It's again, it kind of smells of privilege. Again, don't know the guy, but like,
Though
interesting that he says don't do it and then hires someone else to do it.
Though something I will say that does get under my skin a little bit is when people use particularly hoodoo and how hoodoo was created by slaves as a recourse against like their slave owners to justify petty hex. So I see a lot online. I've seen upper middle class white women talking about, well, the slaves in hoodoo had to hex and it was justified for them. So that justifies me hexing my ex-boyfriend who didn't do anything wrong to me. I think that's really a bad reason, because I think you can justify it for any other reason, but I think using the oppression of slaves to justify someone who's not in a underprivileged situation as your reason, not because there's other reasonings you can use that to justify your petty hexing. You can just say, I'm a moral relativist, I think hexing is cool, right? I don't think you should use hoodoo if you're an upper class white woman as your justification to pettily hex someone. I think that's really out of touch. Like, use any other reason, you know what I mean? But I think being like, well, the slaves did that, it feels really weird to me, because you're not doing it to fight against someone who's enslaving you, you're using it to fight against your ex-boyfriend Tim, who was mean to you once.
It feels like they're trying to give justifications as to why they're allowed to do whatever they want by using others' oppression as like a show or like a costume, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, and also, in a strange way, it becomes this horseshoe theory, a magical thought, in that hoodoo is the only folk magic based system that was used to fight against oppression and slavery and tragedy and awful shit. And it wasn't. I mean, it's probably the most prominent in America, but that's a really post-colonial thought, to be honest, is to say like, oh, like there's only one type of magic that does this, and it was because it was born out of slavery. There's tons of other systems of magic that can do this.
Yeah, a lot of Appalachian folk magic, European folk magic, like folk magic around the world has included hexing in pretty much
every system, I would argue. Like even the ones that are like, don't do it. There's stuff that someone out there is going to consider baneful in some way, shape, or form, like to a reasonable degree. I think every tradition has something that could be considered baneful. I think it's ignorant to say that only, like, I think Tim's right. It's this weird horseshoe thing where like we then start reassociating it with the term black magic and like the racism that comes with that, and it kind of becomes like black people magic equals doing bad thing equals bad magic equals if you do it you're bad equals black people are bad. Like, that horseshoe is really easy to get into if you're not careful.
Yeah, well, because the association of like black magic and black people in America is really toxic and really strong. So I think that's really messed up. But also, like, there's so many, like, pretty much every system will have something, because different people will consider hexing okay at different points, right? So let's use a non-magical example. Pretty much everyone believes if someone's trying to murder you on the street, you can fight back. Pretty much everyone believes that. Most people believe you can even use violence.
Stand your ground.
Yeah, things like stand your ground laws, right? Like, a lot of people are like, it's okay to do a violent, negative, harmful act against someone if they're trying to kill you, right? So certain people will think it's okay to do something negative to someone if they're abusing you or attacking you, right? So everyone will have different levels of when can I do a bad thing to a person, even outside of magic, right? They parallel. So when people say hexing, different people have different points, right? Someone's trying to kill you, I think pretty much everyone's going to believe, yeah, I can hex them, right? And some people are going to say, if they're abusing me, yeah, I can hex them. Some people are going to say, if they're being cruel to me, I can hex them. If they're causing me problems, I can hex. And it's like a spectrum, right? It's basically at what point do you consider hexing okay is the decision you have to make.
Well, where's
right?
that threshold? But then also, are you bringing a magical gun to a knife fight?
Yep.
Yeah.
Does the situation even call for it?
Because there's different severities of hexing, which is why it really bothers me when people make it a black or white conversation. Because you can hex someone and it can be super mild. You can hotfoot someone, which is in the same realm, or you can try to hex their entire family, right? Those are not the same thing.
Let's do a bloodline curse.
Yeah, like a bloodline curse and I'm
casual.
hotfooting someone are very different things.
Well, it's why, like, my personal way of going about deciding whether or not I should do a hex at all in any form is I usually give myself a lot of time to cool down, because often it might be something that's fairly severe, but it's also something that may end up resolving. Now, I've been very lucky. I've not had to deal with any trigger warning. I've been very lucky. I've never had to deal with any form of violent sexual assault. No, like, physical assault in that at that same level. Like, no one's trying to like physically harm me to the point of hospitalization. So like, it's severe but not that level of severe, and if it's not to that degree of severity, I usually give myself time to cool off. I try to figure out other ways to tackle the situation, and I kind of give myself, like, if it should escalate to this level, should they do this thing, then I will look again at the steps. But, most situations that you might consider hexing to some degree, jinx, hex, curse, whatever, usually it's stuff that's going to blow over in the first place. Like, if I don't want this bitch coming near me again, is she actually going to come near me again? Is she actually going to try to get in my face? Is she actually going to try to, like, get involved in my life in a way that I don't want? Or is it a one-time thing and she knows not to come near me again? Because if she doesn't come near me again, there's no point in hexing in the first place, because there's no, like, repeat offense to show me it's a pattern. If it's a one-time thing, why do I need to curse somebody to make it stop if it's already stopped?
Here are some things I know about hexing. I know these things to be true universally, whether you agree with me or not. Doesn't really matter to me. 1, revenge is a dish best served cold. All hexing should be done at a super cool, rational brain state, because the more inflamed we are, the more likely we are to kind of mess up what we're doing, even accidentally. It's best to, if you feel like this situation has arisen to a hex level, give it a few hours till you're a little bit more calm. Give it a few days, give it a few weeks, whatever you need to be a little bit more calm. That's just something that I have learned through my time. And then 2 is that not all hexes are equal. Not all hexes are equal. They're not. And that's not just talking about severity. That's not just talking about, did it meet the threshold to be hexed? Is also, okay, so you've sent a hex out there. Did it hit its target? Were you effective in that? What is it, a slow burn? Because sometimes we hex someone and we think that the situation is resolved, and then it continues to slow burn, or we send out this hex and then it doesn't take effect for years. Those are just things that can happen sometimes, just within the realm of hexing. So it really is a super nuanced, super gray topic, and it does not deserve to be treated so black and white. Like, yes, this is okay, or yes, it's not okay. Every situation needs checking in with. Like, in this situation, did it rise to this level? Is what I did going to be effective? Because you wouldn't say, like, okay, let's say someone killed your mom with a piece of moldavite. You wouldn't just hotfoot them. Okay, that wouldn't be the level that you're meeting.
That's not bringing your mom back.
So, there's different levels to the hex. There's different severities. There's different burn times. There's so much that goes into it. It's such a nuanced topic. And by saying, oh, you can't do this because I think it's wrong. Like, Nike, you can't hex me, even though I killed your mom with moldavite. You can't hex me because it's wrong.
I will do what I want.
And then there's this really fun internet take that I've seen float around a lot lately. If you don't believe in the hex, it's not real. It won't work.
That's the secret shit I've ever heard. This is what happens when you read The Secret and decide to become a witch. So I genuinely think this logic comes from The Secret. So if you've read The Secret, it's the book that kind of popularized the law of attraction. It's that what you believe in, what you think about, comes into your life. So this idea that you, personally, I think this falls apart for a few counts. One, this implies that you believe in the psychological model of magic to the highest degree. You believe that magic is only mental, only psychological, because otherwise it would work, right? Because a spirit would be involved, or the ritual itself would, microcosm, macrocosm, and actually do the thing. So you have to believe it's only emotional. Second of all, if you believe that if they don't believe in it, it wouldn't happen, you gotta tell them they're hexed, okay? Because if they don't know they're hexed, they won't believe in it because they won't know it's happening. So that's basically like, I will say, if you text someone, I've hexed you, it'll probably freak them out, but they would have to know they've been hexed, which I don't know if y'all are telling the people you're hexing. That doesn't seem smart to me. 3, that would imply that, like, anything you don't like, you can just, like, think away. So,
it also gets into like weird victim blaming mentalities with mental health too. It's very dangerous territory.
Yeah, well, just saying you don't believe it won't work. I think if you are hexed and you, like, aggressively try to not believe in it, that could probably be a little bit of a defense, right? Like, that could help you a little bit, because if you think you're hexed, you're probably going to psych yourself out and sort of inadvertently kind of hex yourself with your paranoia, right? Because that can really get into your head. But
I think it's a distorted view of you create your reality.
Yeah.
You create your own reality, but outside forces can influence that, right? Like, just because you create your own reality and you can go off and start your own business doesn't mean that a hurricane's not going to hit tomorrow. Like, you create your own reality to a point. You are still stuck on this plane, on this earth, dealing with other people and natural environments and everything else that goes with it.
This reminds me of the take, what magic can I use to stop a pack of wild dogs running at me? It's that take. It's that energy.
Yeah.
I don't know this take. Can you explain it?
So this was on a Discord server.
This is not on a Discord server. This is on the Discord server where we met. Get it right.
So on that Discord server, someone asked this question.
Okay.
If there's a pack of wild dogs, or was it wolves? It was wolves or dogs?
It was wild dogs.
Wild dogs running at me to attack me. What spells can I use to stop them?
It's something particular, like, can I cast a circle to protect myself?
Oh, it's the circle. Yes. Can I cast a circle to protect myself from the wild dogs? That was it. To which I said, I think my response was, please put down your phone and call the police.
Yeah.
Right.
Get off Discord and... What?
Listen, is that when I watched this video?
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry if there's a pack of wolves running at you. What? Also, how do you have the time to casting a circle takes a couple minutes?
If there's a pack of wolves running at me, I'm going to get in my bath with my herb and my egg.
Occultism with a side of wolves running at you.
Occultism with a pack of wild dogs.
Side of a pack of wild dogs attacking you.
Yeah, it's just really weird. And, like, the other consideration is whether or not the curse should even be the first step to begin with. Because sometimes I would also argue that just a good, like, banishing or binding, and that also, if you consider it baneful or not, is up in the air. When I say baneful, I mean just specifically the jinx hex curse thing.
I'm pro hex. I just want to say you can do whatever you want.
What are our stances? Let's go through our stances. Let's do that right now.
I mean, it's probably going to be akin to what you guys would say. I'm pro asterisk. Don't do it over everything. If this bitch Kim cuts you in line at the grocery store, you don't have to hex her to, like, have her tires blow up or something. Like, you don't have to do anything about it. Somebody being rude, no. But I've done them myself. It would be hypocritical to say I'm against them when I've done them. But I think doing them within a reasonable context is fine.
My take is hexing has a place, but I don't think you should do it constantly. I think that if there's a situation where someone's been really messed up to you or done something wrong, then sure, do a hex. But if someone, you just don't like them and you hex them, or you, like, brag about how you hex all the time, I'm gonna think weird things about your character. Because if you used violence against someone who was attacking you versus you used violence at someone because they were in line in front of you at the 7-Eleven, like, I would have very different views on you. If you're someone who hexes people all the time for no reason, I'm genuinely serious. If you hex, like, minors because they mildly annoy you, or you hex people who, like, you think are ugly, or, like, all these weird things that I've heard to rationalize hexing, like, I do think you're a bad person, okay? If you harm people all the time for fun, like, that's a that's a psychological problem.
I would like to add an addendum to my stance. You shouldn't post them online. Hard stance. I don't think you should post your hexes
Well, let's
online
talk
in any
about that
form.
next. But my point is, if someone's done something wrong or hurt you, I'm super pro hex. Hex your abuser. Do it. But don't hex, like, a kid. Like, I've seen people hexing literal children who annoy them. Like, I'm sorry. I will judge you at that point. You know,
If
I
you
think
hex children, you're a psycho.
Yeah, like, I think there's a point where it's no longer okay. You know? That's my belief.
I'm probably the most liberal with the hexing, but I might also be the most gatekeepy with the hexing, because I think you can hex pretty much for any reason, do baneful magic in general for any reason that you so deem fit, as long as you have the mental capacity to handle what you're doing and you don't have to ask for instructions. I think that there is actually a necessary skill level to doing a hex and to doing a proper hex. I can go online and say I'm hexing you. That doesn't mean I actually am. Doesn't mean I have the skills to do it. So I think that if you are of the percentage of population that actually knows how to perform an effective hex that's going to hit its mark, and you're not pulling your hex out of the back of a book published within the past 10 years, yeah, I think that you're probably going to be the best person to determine whether you should or should not be doing that hex. I'm not going to gatekeep you from that, but I am going to gatekeep people from hexing who don't have the skills necessary to do it yet. Like, hexing's not low-level magic, no matter whether you're doing ceremonial style high magic or folk style low magic. It's not beginner friendly. Hexing, cursing, jinxing, banishing, all that's not low level magic. It does require skill, it does require patience, it does require knowledge and education, and it requires trial and error. The first few times you do it, you're probably going to miss your mark. Honestly, you probably are. So yeah, I think that if someone is at the skill level in which they actually know how to do these things and they are of a rational mind, I'm not going to keep you from doing what you're going to do.
Well, yeah, the real question for our teenage listeners, should you hex your mom you're living with?
Yeah, I have strong feelings on this one. If you're living with your mom, I say if you are underage and or dependent on this person that you are living with, like if it's your mom or your dad or a relative and you could not afford the bills on your own, if they just like up and disappeared one day, could you continue to live? If you are reliant on them to a fairly heavy degree, you shouldn't do it, because especially if you're young and inexperienced, because hot take, I don't think that if you are under 18, I really don't think you can do a proper hex, because I don't think you have enough experience or wisdom to be able to do it properly. So if you are underage, especially, trying to hex your parent, we could go with one of the worst end scenarios that I usually reference of like, all right, so your mom's really mean to you. Maybe she is legitimately abusive. Like, I'll give the credit there. But let's say that you have an abusive mom and you hex her or curse her and she loses her job. Now you lose your house and you are homeless with your mother. So you've not only hexed her, congratulations, you did do it. It worked, but it's also affecting your life too. If you're reliant on them, I really don't think you should do it, because I think it's really stupid and you could fuck up your own life in the process.
Well, that's why I really wanted to cover this, because I think when you hex someone or you prepare to, you should think about the consequences of what's actually happening, right? And like the real world impact. How would this, like, what's the fallout? You know, I'm not talking about karma. I'm not talking about threefold. I'm talking about
like, if you do your hex and it hits its mark, what's going to happen after that?
Yeah, I think you should think that through. I think any sort of magic, you should think about why you're doing it and not do it like for fun. You know, I think you should really think things through. Well, if you're going to do a hex, why? What do you want to happen?
My opinion on this topic is that I can't tell you should or shouldn't hex someone you live with. I've done it. I'd do it again if I had to. And, you know, I can't tell you, I'm a random person on a podcast on the internet. I can't tell you that I understand your situation or your story or your trauma or anything like that. So I have no place to judge whether you should or shouldn't be doing something. It's my opinion.
Yeah, I just think you should think it through, you know? I think you should be thoughtful with what you're doing. I don't think anything should be impulsive in this nature.
Revenge is a dish best served cold.
Absolutely.
I think Temp's right. Like, we're not trying to be dogmatic here and be like, you must follow our way or else. Like, it's
we're
just my experience and my
host. We can't send you to witch jail.
Well, some people want to accuse others. Sometimes it's us in particular. Sometimes it's just like generally anybody who's saying their views. Like we're not trying to be dogmatic. If like Tim said, if you want to do it, we're not going to stop you. These are just our opinions, and all of this ultimately comes down to opinion. If you want to hex your mom that you are financially dependent on, and you think it'll work out for you, fine, go for it. What do I care? It's your life. It's not mine. If it's not affecting my life, I really don't care. I'm just saying what I think about the matter, and my impulse is to try to help people to at least give it a thought. But if you go for
I think
it,
I just have a different
that's on you.
perspective because my parents are dead and Moldavite killed them. So even as a teenager, what?
I mean, her parents are actually dead. That's
They
not
actually
a joke.
are dead. It's in my book. Like I'm not kidding about that. They've been
Yeah.
dead since I was a kid. So as a teenager, I wasn't living with my parents, and yeah, I have hexed people I lived with. Would I do it to my parents? No, because they were fucking lovely angel.
No,
human
because they're dead.
No, because they're dead. Moldavite killed them. But yeah, but I have hexed people that I live with, so I know my situation is different than both your situations.
Yeah.
So for me, my perspective being like, yeah, I'd do it and I'd fucking do it again. Like that's because I didn't have parents, and maybe
Yeah.
you don't either if you're listening to us.
Yeah.
I hexed because I have no parents. That, you know what? Blanket. If you have no parents, you get to hex whoever you want forever.
Free
Done.
hex pass.
To be honest, I tend to err on the side of caution because the first time I did hex work, it went way too far. I did a hex. It was the first time I did it. I was a new-ish practitioner, and it worked. It worked way too much. Like, I did not think it would go as far as it did, you know?
That's another one of those things. Is like you're either not going to hit your mark or you're going to like shoot over.
Yeah, and I shot way over, and so ever since then, even though now I can control those things, I do err on the side of caution because I know how intense these consequences can be if things go a little south, you know?
For me, it's why I specify. It's why I push specificity with what you're doing. Like, if you want to hex someone, I think personally, my opinion is it would be best for you to be as specific as possible. So, if we go with this isn't actually what I went for, but if I had that roommate thing and I really wanted to get this person to not be living with me anymore, I might choose they will lose their job. Well, how will they lose their job? Do they lose their job because their parent died? Do they lose their job because they got into a car accident and couldn't make it in time and they got fired? Do they lose their job because they did something really horrific on the job and hurt someone else, like they violently attacked somebody, therefore they got fired for violence? Pick the thing that you like. For that scenario, I would pick how I would want them to get fired. So I might just be like, they oversleep a lot and keep missing shifts, and that gets them fired. Like something that won't harm anybody but them. It's still the job thing result that I want, and they're not attacking anybody else. They're not getting hurt. Specificity is what I will really stress. Is my opinion on if you want to do hex work.
I agree.
A hot topic when we talk about hexing is hexing politicians. If you guys were around a couple of years ago, there was a big movement to hex Trump. There's a lot of people who did a lot of different types of workings against Trump, which great idea. But I personally think hexing politicians and public figures in general is actually quite hard because when someone has that level of status, there's an egregore around them. And we also know certain politicians and high up people, like there were people doing magic for them. Like there was a whole cabal of like chaos magicians who were doing
people think because of online that like magic is all like a leftist sphere and that the only people who'd be doing magic about politicians are good leftists, and it's like, no, y'all forget that the alt-right and
There were
general
Trump
right
witches.
sentiments.
They're Trump wizards.
There's
They're called
witches and wizards. Like guys, this is not just a leftist sphere. You if you are unaware of that, a large portion of the occult magic witchcraft sphere
is on the right.
Like not even alt-right, just on the right, like Republicans. Like you're not the only ones.
There was a big thing. It's called. You can look it up online. Look up 4chan Kek chaos magic. A bunch of chaos magicians are on the right. A Russian advisor to Vladimir Putin and a former member of the National Bolshevik Party, Alexander Dugin, is a known chaos magician. He has flags. He's kind of like a modern day Rasputin, and we know that he has done workings for the Kremlin and for Putin. Really interesting stuff. And there's generally a lot of people who are doing right-wing political magic. So you're doing magic against all these other people, right? You're not just doing it for the politician. You're also working against the egregore of the person, right? Because when there's so much media attention on someone, it becomes an egregore of who people see them as versus them. You know what I mean? So I think hexing politicians, while there is a long history to it, it's not a new thing. Like, there were people doing political magic during World War II. A very famous thing is Crowley's V sign. You know the British sign V for victory. That was Aleister Crowley's idea, because when you do
for Vendetta.
So if you do the LVX signs in Thelema, you notice that there's the swastika, then there's the V. The V conquers the swastika. It's the way that the LVX keyword is structured. A lot of people have analyzed the LVX keyword. You can Google that. But basically, the V was to counteract the sigil that was the swastika. So the whole V thing in Britain was a very big political magic thing. As well, you have the Thule Society, who did stuff for the Nazi regime. So there's a really long history of political magic. But in general, hexing politicians is a lot harder than it sounds. It's not the same as hexing your friend at work who's meanie. You know, like, hexing a political leader who has an egregore around them, a cultist doing workings for them, and all this stuff is very, very different and is a lot harder, and a lot of the times doesn't really work.
Well,
If
it's
you're
the same
curious
for-
about Donald Trump specifically, there's a very good book called Dark Star Rising that I would recommend.
But in general, it's the same for like internet people as well. Frankie, Chaotic Witch Aunt, has talked about this publicly, so I don't feel bad bringing it up. But Frankie talks about how they made themselves an egregore, and the egregore would like feed on, I believe it was like negative energy and negative comments and people trying to hex them and such. But you know, Frankie obviously like. Frankie / Chaotic Witch Aunt, that's not their real name. Nike's not my real name. Like, most people online are not going to be using a real name, and even if they were, like, I could go with some famous examples that I actually know their legal name, like Shane Dawson. Number one, his name is not Shane Dawson. It's Shane Yaw. I think it's Shane Lee Yaw. But even with his real name, you don't know him as Shane Lee Yaw. You know him as Shane Dawson. So if you're trying to hex Shane Lee Yaw, you don't know him. You don't have anything of him. The only stuff you have is the curated persona Shane Dawson. Same thing with Frankie. You're trying to hex Chaotic Witch Aunt. Well, one, you don't have their name. Two, they have a egregore that they actively do things with, and a lot of like politicians will have that. And they might not speak about it, or maybe other people keep it up for them. But like, there's active stuff going on, and you don't know this person personally. Even Donald J. Trump. Like, let's say, as if nobody was keeping up an egregore for him, there's still the concept of Donald J. Trump, the politician and celebrity figure, and that just exists on its own. And you don't know him personally. You're not in his life. You're not his children. You're not his wife. You're not, you know, a friend of his. You don't have that personal connection to know, like, Don. You don't know Donnie J. Trump. You know Donald J. Trump, the celebrity. It's the same for most people online.
To be honest, I think a lot of people, when they hexed Trump, it was more like less to actually attack Trump and more for their own personal catharsis. I think for a lot of people, that was really what it was. Because, I mean, the Trump hex thing, I think a lot of it was kind of ineffective.
I think it was performative.
I think there's also that level, right? Because there were the people who did the Trump hex who claimed they won the election when it was Black women voting that really won the election for Biden. Yeah. Even if you ignore the whole right-wing Keck meme magicians, please research them. It's a fascinating rabbit hole. Even if you ignore all of them, like, I think a lot of the hex Trump stuff was performative or for personal self-catharsis. Though there were, of course, genuine people who did it for the reason they wanted to hex Trump, right?
I found that a lot of people who did a Trump hex later denied it, like a few years later. Like, no, I didn't do that. I wasn't involved in that. Like, yeah, at the time you were, though. At the time you were.
Like, if you're going to do it, you need to be able to defend it years later, is my feelings.
If you do it, if you do it and you put it on the internet, I promise you that Wayback Machine has proof that you did it.
Yep.
No point in lying about that.
Yeah. You can say it was stupid and that you wouldn't do it now, but you shouldn't lie about the fact that you did in fact say, I'm gonna hex Trump, and now you want to say you didn't. Just own up and say it was dumb. Like, that's it.
But also, like, if you want to do political magic, right? let's be a little more didactic with it, right? Like, why don't you hex a specific local policy, a specific local working? Do a justice working for a specific law that's being passed, rather than hexing the nebulous concept of Trump, right? Do something a little bit more practical and smaller scale that's more likely to work. I think political magic is misused a lot of the time. And I think magical activism, like I saw a lot of people trying to hex the concept of the police. What would be a lot more effective would be to hex specific legal cases, talk about police restructure. Like there's a lot more, I think, effective, smaller, more specific things you can do besides hexing like the negative egregore. Like I saw someone hex fascism. Like hexing the idea of fascism is not really going to help when you could hex a specific local politician, a specific law. Like there are a lot of kind of like trans health laws, like do stuff to aid those, you know? I think there's a lot more effective ways you can do political magic than like, I'm going to hex the idea of a fascist, you know?
Well, a lot of the ones that I was seeing was more along the lines of like, don't try to fucking hex Trump. That's really stupid, and you probably don't know what you're doing in the first place. All the like blah blah blah, all that stuff we've already listed. But it's also like, why don't you cast protections for protesters? Why don't you like have something to help them come home safely, to not get tear gas in their eyes, to make sure that they have the supplies, to prosperity working so that they can afford to get help if they need it, for bail funds to help like with some of that, to donate to some of those as well, to spread your prosperity to others who might need it in these cases. Like, why are you just focusing on what you can do against people rather than what you can also do for people? Doing political magic does not just have to be, I'm gonna hex a politician, I'm going to ruin this thing that they're trying to get passed, which is all well and good. But why is it only ever the negative side? Why is it not ever stuff that actually actively helps people? Protection, getting them home safe, prosperity, all of that. Why is it only ever the I'm gonna hurt somebody?
Well, because I think online it's cool to hex. I think being like someone who's super pro hex and hexes a lot is kind of like a cool girl thing. You know, I think we've developed this like cool edginess around hexing, especially in like left-hand path spaces. Like I've seen left-hand pathers online flex about like how much damage they can do, how often they hex, and all this stuff. And I think it comes across a little cringy because a lot of people hex for like really legitimate, painful reasons. So I think to be like, yeah, I hex all the time. I'm a black witch, witchy and bitchy, you know, like that type of stuff, I think is very cringy.
Black witch as in like black magic, not black as in the race.
No, not black as in the race. No.
Well, you know, I think that there's this misunderstanding with political hexes specifically that I want to touch on, and a reason why they don't work, because neither of you really said it, and I think it goes without saying, to be honest. When you hex something like so universal, so nebulous as like a bill or a politician, right? Your assumption is that your magic is stronger than any other protection this person might have, and you're taking out of account Christians, prayer, any other religion, and any other protection practice that they have. But since we're in America and we're talking about American politics, I'm going to bring up Christians and prayer, because
prayer is powerful.
Christian prayer circles are vicious, and they're protecting these politicians. So it's not even a talk about egregores. Honestly, these things don't even make it to egregore level because they're getting beat out by evangelical prayer warriors. Like, there's a lot of things going on there behind.
I mean, how many times do you see like evangelicals being like, I will pray for this bill's success, I will pray that God protects you, and all the politicians trying to do God's work? Like, they're not joking, they're not just saying that. Like, a lot of evangelical churches will literally do prayer circles to help an abortion bill pass or an anti-trans bill pass, to help politicians do what they need to keep them healthy and safe so that they can get to vote on these things, so they can show up and actually like do the work. Like, it's
Look,
not
I think
a
it's
joke.
just a hot take. I gotta say it is that I think that a lot of witches don't recognize the work that evangelicals and Christians are doing in America.
I agree.
For politicians and celebrities, because they emasculated Yahweh, right? So like from the witches' perspective, they take away power from Christianity because they had experiences with it, and they left the church and they left that governing body, and they didn't experience what these people experience. But just because you are a pagan now and you're not a Christian doesn't mean that Christians aren't experiencing these things.
Also, prayer is really powerful. Like, if you're a pagan, prayer can be used for you. Like, prayer is very prayer is seen as much lesser than certain rituals and spells a lot of the time. And I think we really underestimate prayer. I mean, Aleister Crowley said very regularly to inflame yourself in prayer, to pray a lot, because it really, really helps. It is really important. And I think paganism in general really understates the value and effectiveness that prayer can actually have.
Well, it gets into a separate conversation that we won't really get into here about like anti-Abrahamic sentiments in witchcraft and almost dismissing Christianity as being not real in a sense. Like, well, Christianity's stupid and made up and dumb and not real and not powerful and doesn't work. My pagan spirituality is so much more real and cool and much older and has more power than any Christian could ever have. And it's like, listen, I'm glad you believe in your spirituality a lot. That doesn't make Christian mysticism and Christian magic any less powerful. And there's a lot fucking more Christians in the world than there are pagans, by far, by magnitudes. And to just dismiss all the Christian prayer circles praying for, you know, bills and politicians and all the things that you're working against, to dismiss that is honestly, I think, to be an idiot. I think it is stupid to dismiss it, and it also is dismissing a lot of practices that are within what we consider the pagan sphere, because a lot of things like hoodoo, like brujeria, they use Christianity, they use like Christian prayers and Christian saints. They use those things in magic. So you're dismissing a lot of practices in the first place, and it's just it's dumb. It's dumb to discount those because you think that paganism is cool and real, and Christianity's dumb and not because you had bad experiences with the church.
Yeah, it's so weird because everyone uses hoodoo to justify cursing all the time, but then shits on Christianity as if a lot of hoodoo practitioners aren't Christian.
Well, it uses Christian prayers. Like, it does. They are intertwined. They are together. You can't separate them out. You can't take the Christianity out of hoodoo. You can't take the Christianity out of brujeria. Like, they are used together.
I mean, there's different
you cannot
streams.
separate
I think
them.
that's a misconception. That's it, not even for this episode, but there's a lot of misconceptions between where the lines are between hoodoo, voodoo, santeria, brujeria, Appalachian folk magic, and there's some other Creole things going on. So I think there are some confusions where those lines are, and people confuse them quite frequently. But I don't think that we are the right voices to discuss that.
True,
and this is certainly not that episode.
But just the
Agreed.
general anti-Abrahamic stuff is what makes people think that they're powerful enough to take on these politicians and dismiss the Christian prayer circles, even just like plain American Christianity.
Yes. So my final thoughts are: bide the Wiccan laws we must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Live and let live, fairly take and fairly give. Cast the circle thrice about to keep the evil spirits out. To bind the spell every time, let the spell be spark and rhyme. Soft of eye and light of touch, speak little, listen much. Day of still go by waxing moon, chanting out the witch's rune. Widdershins go by the waning moon, chanting out the baneful rune. When the lady's moon is new, kiss her hand to her times two. When the moon rides at her peak, then your heart's desires speak. Heed the north wind's mighty gale, lock the door and drop the sail. When the wind comes from the south, love will kiss thee on the mouth. When the wind blows from the west, departed souls will have no rest. When the wind blows from the east, expect the new and set the feast. 9 woods in the cauldron go, burn them fast and burn them slow. Elder be the lady's tree, burn it not or cursed you'll be. When the wheel has begun to turn, let the Beltane fires burn. When the wheel has turned to Yule, light the log, and the horned one. Heed ye flower, bush, and tree, by the lady blessed be. Where the rippling waters go, cast a stone, and truth you'll know. When ye have a true need, hearken not to others' greed. With a fool no season spend, lest ye be counted as his friend. Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. Mind the threefold law you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. When misfortune is anew, wear the blue star on thy brow. True in love ever be, lest thy lover falls to thee. 8 words the Wiccan Rede fulfill, and harm ye none, do what ye will. So there you go. That is the Wiccan Rede. You've actually heard it. That is where the threefold law comes from. That was written by Doreen. It was not by Gardner. So now you have the context. You can actually understand that argument. I needed to read that to you so you could understand what the Rede actually says.
I can't believe this bitch stole my gag.
My final thoughts are, what the fuck did you just say about me, you little bitch? I'll have you know I graduated top of my class in the Navy SEALs, and I've been involved in numerous secret raids in Al-Qaeda, and I have over 300 confirmed kills. I am trained in guerrilla warfare, and I'm the top sniper in the entire U.S. Armed Forces. You are nothing to me but just another target. I will wipe you the fuck out with precision, the likes of which has never been seen before on this earth. Mark my fucking words. I'm not doing the whole rest of it. It's a lot.
My final thoughts are that you have control over who you hex and who you don't.
Temp, this is your opportunity. All three of us were supposed to do a little bit. Georgina read off her poem.
Okay, here's the bit. Are you ready? Here's the bit. Call Roto Rooter. That's the name. And away go troubles down the drain.
800-588-2300 Empire.
Today.
If you want to support the show, Occultism with a Side of Salt, you can join our Patreon for extended shows if you want even more of this. 3 shows where we give fun little audio ship. But yeah, if you join our Patreon, it really helps. I'm Georgina Rose. I go by .darling DAAT. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Patreon, and Ko-Fi, and I do tarot readings, so you DM me on Instagram or Twitter.
I'm gonna read our patrons, and we're very appreciative if you I can do words. If you're $10 and up, we get to read off your name and thank you personally because you're cool and you help keep the show going and allow us to get new microphones for Temp and stuff. So thank you, Victoria, Temple, Rose, Ree, Nico, Nauseated, Michelle, Melissa, Megan, Marshall, aw, I love you, Marshall. M, there's just the letter M, I stay on that. Lee, Kat, Kai, Jessica, Dungareed Pagan, Doitsu, Witch of the Rising Stones, Janine, Jay, Evan, Barry, and Amy Monster. Thanks, y'all. You make it just, real nice to be able to do stuff, and we're glad that we can provide extra content for you, like our video versions and our pre-shows and stuff. Our pre-shows are the best part of the podcast, hands down. Also, I'm Nike, and you can find me at Warrior Witch Nike kind of everywhere.
Isn't he just being so cute? Well, I'm Temperance. You can find me pretty much everywhere at Wildwoman Witchcraft. I'm on Twitch at Tempora Apples. My book, Year of the Witch, is available everywhere books are sold.
And this has been
Occultism with a Side
Occultism with a Side of Salt.
Non-tangible thing. Grows where you are. It exists where you are.
An intentional journey to open up the pathways
To connect us to something bigger. It helps everybody in the equation.
has been the magic of the people, and it's passed from person to person.
You have to follow through. You have to do the thing. Happy, safe place.
Is that your logic, or was that something you were told?
Focus on your craft